Welcome to Pac-12 Chalk Talk, your source for everything Pac-12. I'm Mike Sackley, and in studio tonight from left to right, we have Ben Haber, Pierce Bly, and Robbie Baker. All right, guys, College Game Day was in Eugene this past weekend, and the Ducks showed why they're one of the best teams in the nation, beating the number 18 Sun Devils 41-27. Running back Michael James didn't play because of a dislocated elbow, and quarterback Darren Thomas went down early in the second half. But Oregon outscored Arizona State 20-3 after Thomas's injury. So, guys, I turn it over to you. Who do you think stepped up most in place of James and Thomas? We'll start with Ben.
I really think Kenyon Barner, as you see here, he was very explosive. Well, that's actually Darren Thomas, but they really were able to get the running game going, especially in the second half. They played big, and Brian Bennett had a great game in the absence of Thomas. They were all very helpful, and the defense played very well themselves.
Yeah, Kenyon Barner obviously held to under 30 yards rushing in the first half, had over 100 in the second half. Arizona State's defense was unable to contain him, and that's a big reason why the Ducks ended up winning.
And for me, guys, the player who stepped up most was Brian Bennett. He was the backup quarterback, came into the game in the second half, and he didn't have the best stats. 6 rushes for 65 yards, 2 passes for 22 yards. But what he did to that Oregon team was he rejuvenated them, and that led them to the victory in the end.
Now, Arizona State managed to hold the Ducks' running game to 58 yards in the first half, but the Ducks put up 24 points after the Devils' opening drive in the second half. Oregon had 269 yards rushing in the second half, but for the Sun Devils, a field goal was all the offense they could put together. What plays impacted the game the most for the Devils? Was it the all-too-familiar penalties, Pierce?
No, I don't think the argument for penalties being the reason that the Sun Devils lost is a good one. And the only reason for that is because Oregon was penalized just once less, so that argument is kind of nonsense to me. The fumble was obviously a big momentum shift in the game, but Oregon won by 2 scores. There were a lot of things the Sun Devils could have done in this game that they didn't, and they ended up losing because of that, but not because of penalties or the fumble.
And, Mike, for me, there was 2 things that stood out to me why the Sun Devils ultimately lost this game. Oregon made some big-time adjustments in their secondary in the second half that shut down an effective Brock Osweiler in the first half. And also, Coach Erickson for ASU, you play to win the games. There was many times where in the second half, for example, ASU had 4th down. They punted late in the game. 4th down, they kick a field goal. They were down 14 points. You got to go for the touchdown there.
Pierce, I think the difference between the penalties for ASU and Oregon, I think, are when they were, the times they happened. Momentum really starting to go for ASU. Bonehead plays, Arvonte perfect, Drell Robinson. I think it really held them back. And that one pass, roughing the passer call in the back of the end zone when it was 17-all, Oregon went down and drove, making it 24-17, really took the game out of the ASU's hands.
Now USC took on California at AT&T Park, beating them by a final score of 30-9. This loss drops Cal to 0-3 in conference play and means that Cal was outscored twice on national TV against Oregon and USC by a combined 73 points to their 24. Despite the tough schedule off the bat, do you think Cal's remaining schedule favors them? Can they finish above 500 this season? Robbie?
Well, Mike, for me, there's a couple games that I think that they can win. I see UCLA on the road as a game that they can win, Wazoo, and then Oregon State at home. Those are games they can win, but only if they can beat the Utah Utes. Utah's a team that went on the road and beat Pitt last week, and if they can beat Utah, then they can get momentum going and then possibly win those games I just mentioned.
Yeah, Robbie's absolutely right. And for me, I only really see them being Washington State and Oregon State. They've played the 3 games that they've won this year have come against teams that have a combined record of 6-14. I just don't see them finishing higher than 2-7 in conference play.
They have 2 automatic losses on their schedule left at Stanford, at ASU. They're really not going to be able to put a fight in either one of those games. And Zach Maynard has played very well in his first 3 games, but recently not so well in their 3 losses. He's going to need to get the Tide going if they want to turn this season around.
Guys, we saw Cal quarterback Zach Maynard struggle big time against the Trojan defense. He was sacked 3 times, one of which caused him to lose a fumble, and he also threw 3 picks. Are you at all surprised that head coach Jeff Tedford didn't pull Maynard? Maybe see what backup Alan Bridgeford could have done against USC. Ben?
No, I don't think Alan Bridgeford should come in against USC. It's too much to ask for him. Maynard has showed signs of being very good this year. As you remember, he had 9 TDs and only 3 interceptions in the first 3 games. He struggled lately, but he's earned his respect in that locker room.
And let's also remember that this was a 2-score game going into the last quarter. Obviously, you want your most experienced quarterback in the game if you want to try to win. Also, Bridgeford had only played against Presbyterian, an FCS school, and against Oregon in the very late stages of that game after it was clear it was a blowout. Asking him to go in and try and beat USC would have been way too much.
And if you look at Maynard's numbers, just surely on paper, yes, he's gotten worse as the year has progressed. But if you watch the tape, the kid has no time to throw the ball, especially in that USC game. They were on him very quick, couldn't even get three-step drops to get passes off quickly. And when you're all draped over by defenders like that, you're not going to be able to make the precise passes to win games.
Is Maynard's job on the line, though, in the upcoming weeks? Is he really on the hot seat?
I don't think so. I don't think Cal's record is not good enough necessarily that he is on the hot seat. I think he needs the experience.
I think he had one bad game. I think he'll be okay.
All right, we've seen a lot of games so far this season, and we still have plenty to go. But based on teams' performances so far, who do you guys expect to be fighting for the first Pac-12 championship crown on December 2nd? Robbie?
Well, Mike, for me, it's very easy in the South. It's going to be ASU. They own the tiebreaker over USC because they beat them, and USC is not even eligible for championship play because of their sanctions. So ASU should easily win the South. As far as the North goes, for me, it's a two-team race between Oregon and Stanford, and I think it's going to go to Oregon. You saw Stanford hasn't really played a high level of opponent so far this year. Oregon's already played LSU. They lost, but they have seen those good teams, and Oregon is just very, very fast, and we saw last week they're very deep.
I'm going to have to disagree with Robbie on this one. I actually think that Stanford will take the North Division, and the only reason for that is because they're playing Oregon at home. I think Stanford is too strong, both offensively and defensively, for Oregon. They're ranked 5th nationally in both of those categories, points for and points against. As for the South, ASU is running away with it, barring a major collapse and a loss against UCLA. They should take that.
One thing about the North I do want to talk about that neither of you did mention is Washington. You got to give them credit. They are a legitimate candidate to win this Pac-12 North. They are going to have a tough test with Stanford this week, which we'll talk about in a second.
The question was, who do you think will be playing? Do you legitimately think Washington will be?
Stanford will be there because they're the most balanced team in the nation. They have the 5th most points scored, and they have the 5th least points given up, so they're going to be there in the North. And South's going to be ASU.
But do you guys think that the fact that Stanford really hasn't played any top-notch opponents, is that going to hurt them down the stretch, do you think?
They have to play them at some point. You can't blame them for their schedule. They've done what they're supposed to do against the weak opponents that they've had, so we'll see how they do against. But
will it hurt them when they play a good team like Oregon?
No. Andrew Luck's way too experienced of a quarterback. He knows what he's doing.
Transitioning to our Player of the Week segment, let's see who impressed the guys on offense last weekend. Ben?
Andrew Luck. I just talked about him a minute ago. He had 336 yards, 4 TDs, and 1 interception. The remarkable thing about that game, he was struggling most of the game, guys. Washington State did a really good job, and I really think he's going to be a big-time prospect at the next level, possibly the biggest prospect in the NFL at the quarterback position since Peyton Manning.
I'm going to go ahead and have to be general on this one. I'm picking Oregon's running backs. Obviously, they were without LaMichael James against Arizona State this weekend. However, the Ducks running backs combined for 327 total yards against an Arizona State defense that isn't really that bad against the run.
Guys, it's time to jump on the Keith Price bandwagon. Last week, 21 of 28, 257 yards, 4 touchdowns. Most of these stats actually coming in the first half of that game. Keith Price is the real deal at quarterback for Washington.
Now, what about the other side of the ball, your defensive players of the week? Pierce?
I'm going to have to be general on this one as well. Utah's defense, after giving up 399 yards to Arizona State, held Pittsburgh to 120 yards total. They did not give up an offensive touchdown. Pittsburgh actually scored on a kick return and off of a blocked punt. Especially when I picked Pittsburgh to win that and Utah to lose, I got to give my props to a defensive unit playing very well at Utah.
And I'm going to give my player of the week, guys, to Anthony Gilden, the cornerback from Oregon. He had 6 tackles and an interception in that game against the Sun Devils last week. His interception kind of rattled Brock Osweiler as that game got into later stages, and Oregon's secondary made some key adjustments to shut down the Sun Devils.
My defensive player of the week goes to USC linebacker Deion Grant. He had a really good game, 2 interceptions, really flustered Zach Maynard, and he also had 8 tackles, so that should be definitely taken into account for. He was really good. He's only a freshman, and he has a big future ahead of him as a Trojan.
Now let's take a look at our matchups for Week 8. First up, we have UCLA at Arizona this Thursday, and number 9 Oregon taking on Colorado on Saturday. Who will come out ahead in these games, Robbie?
Well, Mike, then the U of A and UCLA game, I'm going to take U of A because the way I see it, a new coach coming in, they're going to be a rejuvenated football team. They're at home. They have the national spotlight on them. I got U of A winning that one. As far as the Oregon-Colorado game, it will not even be a contest. The Ducks will run away with this one.
I disagree with Robbie. UCLA has only lost to Houston, Texas, and Stanford all year. What is the one key component in that? Those teams are all ranked. U of A is a reeling football squad. UCLA will go in to Tucson and win that game. As for Oregon and Colorado, Robbie said it all. Oregon will destroy Colorado.
Pierce, you made some good points about the UCLA-Arizona game, but I'm going to have to disagree. I really like Arizona. I think Nick Foles will be a little too much for the UCLA secondary. He's been very good all year round, and UCLA secondary has showed really a lot of signs of weaknesses.
And you got to remember real quick that UCLA defense, we talked about them earlier in the year as a struggling defensive unit that really hasn't put too much together either later on this season.
Definitely.
I don't think U of A's defense is very good either, so I think UCLA
But
is
the
going to get it
difference
done.
is there, Pierce, is that U of A's offense is better and is able to capitalize on that more than UCLA's offense, who's struggling at the quarterback position.
What's your opinion?
And then Oregon over
Colorado?
Oregon over Colorado. Thank you very much.
Ben, next up, we've got Utah at Cal, and a couple of teams looking to get their second conference win, Oregon State and Washington State. Ben, we'll start with you on those two games. Who do you like?
I like Utah. I was the only one on this panel to pick them last week in Pitt, and I'm going to go with them again. I think California's struggling. I like Utah in that matchup, and I really like Washington State at home over Oregon State. They're starting to get things together on that offensive side of the ball. I really like wide receiver Marcus Wilson and Jeff Toole or Lobostel at quarterback. They should win.
Well, I obviously made a huge mistake picking Utah last week, but I will pick them this week because I think they're going to go on the road and take Cal down at AT&T Park for the second straight week for Cal, that is. As for the Oregon State-Washington State game, that's kind of a toss-up. The only reason I'm going to pick Oregon State in this is because James Rodgers and Marcus Wheaton are two strong wide receivers for Oregon State, and I don't think Washington State's secondary is going to be able to cover them.
Yeah, it's killing me right now. I'm going to have to agree with Ben again here. Utah's going to beat Cal on the road. Utah went on the road last week. Much to my chagrin, I lost that pick as they beat Pittsburgh on the road. But I think they'll have an easy time beating Cal on the road this week. And as far as the Washington State-Oregon State game goes, you're going to have a very good Oregon State secondary against an upstart Washington State passing attack. But I think Wazoo will get the better of the Beavers.
And finally, we've got our last two games, which includes the Pac-12 game of the weekend, Washington at number 7 Stanford, as both teams try to remain undefeated in conference. And then USC travels to South Bend to take on the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Couple of big games here, Pierce. Who do you like in each one?
Yeah, Notre Dame is going to win this game against USC, and for only one reason. Notre Dame's 2 losses this year were by a total of 7 points. Since then, they've outscored opponents by 75 points. I guess that's 2 points I made there. But USC will be without Mark Tyler. They're playing halfway across the country. I think Notre Dame gets it done at home. As for Washington and Stanford, Washington is a very good football team. However, Stanford is a much better football team, and they're also playing at home. Stanford wins.
I'm also going to have to agree with you there, Pierce. I think Notre Dame will win this game. USC going on the road, Notre Dame a hostile environment, and Notre Dame has strung together quite a few quality wins here, and I think they will get the W at home. And as far as the Washington-Stanford game goes, Washington's a good team, like you said, Pierce, but Stanford is a better team. They're at home. They'll get the W.
Yeah, I'm really starting to think I don't disagree with your picks, guys. I disagree with you guys as human beings. I really like USC in this matchup. I like Matt Barkley. I think he's just a better player than Tommy Rees. They've played well in the Fighting Irish all the time. But going back to the days with Matt Leinart, going back to the days with Carson Palmer, I like them to get the W this weekend. And then
Who is still on that football team?
It's Carson Palmer.
Matt Barkley's better than the guys that are on the football team. And then
the kid that took Nick Foles for the second best in the Pac-12 a few weeks ago.
Mr. Genius. And then Washington, Stanford. I really like Stanford. I think Stanford's just a better football team. You guys characterized that one correctly. Washington's good. Stanford's better. I like Stanford in that matchup.
Alrighty, guys. Well, you know we can't watch them all, so if you could only watch one game, which one would that be, Robbie?
Oh, Mike, for me, this is very simple. It's going to be the USC-Notre Dame game, the battle for the Golden Shillelagh in South Bend. Primetime game on NBC. Big-time college football, guys.
There are 2 games this weekend that have implications. One is Washington at Stanford. However, I'm going to tune in to UCLA at Arizona. The only reason for that is if UCLA does lose to Arizona, ASU essentially runs away with the South. If they win, they remain in contention, and that game in Sun Devil Stadium in November will be a huge one. Actually, it's in the Rose Bowl. I'm sorry.
I think the implications in the North, as you said, Washington, Stanford are bigger. Washington trying to prove they are within the likes of Oregon and Stanford. I really like them in that game. But it's going to be tough for them to go into Palo Alto, a tough place to play. Andrew Luck plays very well at home, and Coach David Shaw has done a great job there in his first year. Going to be a good matchup, and I don't want to miss it.
I don't either, but
Well, Ben, work on that singing. That's all the time we have. Thanks for joining us. For more Chalk Talk, be sure to subscribe right here on YouTube and follow us on Twitter at Pac-12 Chalk Talk. For Ben Haber, Pierce Bly, and Robbie Baker, I'm Mike Sackley. We'll see you next week.